Hi, so my name is Maria, and I'm going to be discussing the use of elements of myth and ritual in Black Orpheus and in Pan's Labyrinth. Starting with Black Orpheus, we see a lot of elements of both. I would say we see more of ritual, but starting with myth, the whole frame of the movie is, of course, the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. Um, and they do acknowledge the myth within the movie, and it's just, that retelling within the context of the Carnival in Rio de Janeiro. But we see, I think, a lot more ritual than we do myth, and I don't think the two are as connected as the myth ritualism theory seems to suggest, because in Black Orpheus, we see the ritual of Carnival, and we see the characters getting ready for it and how important the costumes are, and that does relate to the New Year's, the ritual of New Year's that we discussed in this section, but it doesn't exactly correlate directly to the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. Um, and then the other aspect of ritual that we see is towards the end, when Orpheus is looking for Eurydice after she dies, and he gets brought to this other kind of ritual ceremony. We see the ritual taking place, but we don't really know about the myth behind it. So in the movie, it seems like ritual is more important and more significant than myth. And then we also see this motif of death and rebirth, as we see in the monomyth, and even as we see in the theories about New Year's festivals, how there's like a cyclical kind of development. So we see Eurydice dies, and then she is kind of reincarnated. Her soul is reincarnated in the body of another person, and then in the end, once Orpheus turns around and looks at her, her soul leaves Earth. And in the end, Orpheus dies, and it's almost like, so Eurydice has her cycle of life and death, but when Orpheus dies, it's almost full circle as well, because he kind of goes back to be with the love of his life in death. And then moving on to Pan's Labyrinth, we also see here, I think myth is a bit more prominent than it was in Black Orpheus, because it's the movie starts and ends with the myth of the Princess Moana, and at the beginning of the movie, she ventures out into the human world and dies. And so there is, at first, a powerful being dying, even if it's not necessarily the king / god character of the monomyth. And then the aspect of ritual that we can see in Pan's Labyrinth could be the quests that, or the tasks that Ophelia is doing throughout, and then at the end, when we see the kind of blood sacrifice that happens, when Ophelia's blood is spilled, that is also a big aspect of ritual. But I think something very prominent, even more prominent in Pan's Labyrinth than in Black Orpheus, is that cyclical kind of death and rebirth situation, because it happens very explicitly where Princess Moana at the beginning of the movie dies, and at the end of the movie, Ophelia dies, but she is kind of reincarnated as Princess Moana, who comes back to life in the underworld and in kind of the spiritual realm. And of course, in Pan's Labyrinth, more than in Black Orpheus, we also see that the aspect of fairy tale and the contrasts between fairy tale and real life. We see parallels between the beasts that Ophelia encounters in Pan's Labyrinth and the villains that the real life villains who are in the kind of political atmosphere of the real life. So in conclusion, in both movies, we definitely see aspects of myth and ritual. I do think, from what I saw, it's hard to directly connect sometimes the myths and the rituals. Sometimes ritual is more significant in one storyline than myth, or vice versa, but definitely there's always some kind of ritual connected to a story and a reasoning behind it, which is usually the myth. And I think in both movies the motif of death and rebirth is very prominent and is basically the whole story, and kind of starts and ends that way.